So right now, I would like to introduce the moderator for this panel, this Susan Squibb. So Susan Squibb is Denver's resident cannabis maven, which means somebody who's an expert on the cannabis plant and from all dimensions. Susan graduated from CU Boulder with a Bachelor of Science in Anthropology and from the Community College of Denver in the paralegal program. Her focus is on public education on cannabis, and she has been involved in hemp and marijuana business and advocacy in Colorado for the past 25 years. To that end, she organizes the annual Mother's High Tea, which features experts, scholars, activists, and elected officials who are on the front lines of drug policy reform and public education in Colorado. She was a journalist with the Cannabis column at the Denver Post with Ricardo Baca. And 2 nights ago, on Thursday night, she was the featured speaker at the Colorado History Center in Denver with a talk on the history of Colorado cannabis legalization. She also donated a portion of her unique cannabis archives to the museum. And I wonder, Susan, if that will be available for public viewing, or is it really there just for research? Maybe you can say that. But thank you so much, Susan, for being our always capable participant, moderator, speaker at this event, and your commitment to public education on these topics.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I am delighted to be here, and I am imagining that we are all at the campus, such a beautiful campus that we know and love, CU Boulder. When I was a freshman at CU, I was a docent for the museum exhibit, Healing Power of Plants. So I'm just absolutely delighted to continue my relationship with CU Boulder and discussing issues related to plants and plant medicine. For today, we're going to kind of have 3 different sections of this session. So we will have introductions. I will introduce each of our speakers, and then they will have a few minutes to talk about their work and how they are shifting the paradigm in the avenues of being users and activists in these fields of both cannabis and therapeutic psychedelics. Then we will have a section of where I will ask the panelists questions, and then we will open it up and ask audience questions to the panelists. So when the opportunity for the audience to ask questions, please direct it to someone specific, and then that will help guide the discussions. So our first speaker is Brigitte Mars. Brigitte Mars is a Boulder-based natural health icon with 50 years of experience as a medical herbalist, a nutritional consultant, an end-of-life doula, and she holds space for groups and individuals in psychedelic ceremonies. Her credentials include, but are not limited to, professional membership at the American Herbalist Guild, a member of MAPS, and a graduate of the Psychedelics Sitters School. Brigitte Mars is a seasoned professor at schools, universities, and educational events all over the world. And Brigitte Mars is a prolific author and producer of books, DVDs, and her current app, iPlant. In the early 1970s, Brigitte lived with Rosemary Leary, the wife of Dr. Timothy Leary, and explored how to create sacred set and setting for psychedelic ceremonies. In addition to her private practice, Brigitte shares her set and setting expertise as faculty advisor for the Psychedelic Club at Naropa University. Brigitte is the voice for the audio version of the psychedelic prayers based on the Tao Te Ching, translated by Dr. Leary and Dr. Ralph Metzner. Please join me in welcoming the incomparable Brigitte Mars.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored, Susan. So I get just to chat for a few minutes here? Yes. Okay. So my paradigm that I want to share today is I decided I wanted to base it on the chakras, which is how I do a lot of things. And in case you don't know what that means, think of the rainbow that permeates our creation, the colors. And you could also think of the Kundalini energy at the base of our spine that rises to our crown chakra. So the word chakra means wheel of light. So a little journey through the chakras and how it might relate to psychedelic use. So, red is about survival. And I want to say clearly that psychedelics are not for everyone. When I'm about to work with a client, it's really important to find out, are they on medication? Do they have seizures? Are they prone to panic attacks? What might be an appropriate dose for someone? If they're a beginner, if they have some hesitation, we don't need to start with heroic doses. What would you do if someone were having a difficult or a dangerous experience? Are you prepared to navigate that? So that's a little bit about, red, creating safe set and setting, and knowing that mixtures of different substances can create unpredictable results. Finding out if people are on antidepressants might also be very important. So, and then as we move into orange, orange is about community and who you are with. Perhaps if this is a early experience, having a guide, someone who's going to be present during the experience to keep you safe. Maybe the guide is the person who, drives you to the beautiful place in nature, or maybe they're the one who says, no, we're not going to take our clothes off at the park. We're not going to get locked out of the house. So that can be a really appropriate thing. But also, because orange is about community, know that the people that you choose to do these substances with, and I like to call them sacred plant medicines. I don't use the term drugs that much. I work at a pharmacy, so there's that, and then there's sacred plant medicines. But know that if you are with people you know and trust, that's probably going to bode a lot better than if you start out with like, I'm not really sure about that. Also, agreements about sexuality. It's very possible that in the openness of a psychedelic experience that sexual feelings can come up. And I think that's a really good thing to, say ahead of time, that there are boundaries. Hand holding is okay, but at that moment of at oneness, I raised two daughters and I have three grandchildren. So I always told my kids, never decide to be sexually intimate with someone for the first time while you're on anything. You really want to make that decision while you are not on anything, because that moment of we're all one might be a little different the day after, when the reality is that this is not appropriate. So yellow is about creating safe set and setting. And I love the idea of creating an altar, maybe having beautiful books to look at or art supplies, maybe some tools that you want to play with, like essential oils or flower essences. I know that my interest in herbal medicine was very much awakened by the first time I tried ginseng. I was coming down from a psychedelic session and someone offered me some ginseng, and I could feel the power of what that did. Like, wow, this is really something. And it brought me back to that peak experience. And what kind of things do you want to surround yourself? When I lived with Rosemary Leary, we would plan these sessions very often around a time of a full moon or an eclipse or a season. And we would spend days creating safe set and setting. And that might mean cleaning and organizing and having healthy snacks already there. You certainly don't want to be like craving something and having to navigate in a grocery store and putting yourself out there in the world. But having what you need, having art supplies handy rather than looking in the garage for your college Strathmore sketchbook, for example. So green is also about the purity of a substance. And I love hearing about groups like Dance Safe, because if a substance isn't pure, or it's something someone's buying at a festival or for someone they don't really know and trust, that can have a huge effect. And also, weighing your doses, just eyeballing it can make a huge difference between something that feels safe and containable to something that blows you out of the water and can be difficult to navigate. Of course, being in nature is a wonderful thing, but how are you going to get there? And so having someone, perhaps the guide who is sober, who drives you there and gets you safely back, and maybe, cautions you about, it can be dangerous in nature if you think you're invincible and can jump, across giant boulders. So keeping you safe, because the last thing you want to do is end up in the emergency room. Green could also be about the importance of, deep breathing, smelling essential oils. I'm a big believer in aromatherapy, that when we smell different substances, it can affect our moods, our hormones. And when I do work as a psychedelic guide, I love the idea of wafting different essential oils in front of someone's nose. They can be very comforting. I usually just put a few drops on the palm of my hand and encourage them to breathe deep. It can really change the scenario of what's going on, and could also be somewhat evolutionary. So I even think about using different essential oils at different times in the journey space. So blue is about the throat chakra and communication. I love the idea of, if you're with a small group of people, of saying a prayer or setting an intention. It seems that when you verbalize, this is what I'm hoping to gain from my experience today, when you share it and you verbalize it, it can actually make the intention more profound, because you're having other people witnessing it. Oming or chanting can be a very powerful thing to synchronize your frequencies. It's not like you do it the whole time, but like we're gathering our energy together. And, the kind of music that's played. I remember the first time I ever really got called to task. I went to an all-girls boarding school, and someone said, "Come quick. Someone's taken 8 hits of acid and she's having a really hard time." And I was only 15, but I knew that playing Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones did not pass the acid test. So changing the music was a real game changer. Not that I have anything against the Rolling Stones, but like, let's put something on mellow that doesn't have so many words, that maybe has a spiritual vibe to it, that's not coming from a place of ego and, how many people you've seduced and all that. But I also want to say that blue is about communication, and having raised children and teenagers in Boulder, I remember when my daughter Sunflower said, "Mom, I'm ready. I want to take some psychedelic medicine. I'm going to do it tomorrow with my friend." I was so grateful that she was able to come and talk to me rather than lie about skipping school or pilfering money from, the piggy bank or something. And I actually prepared a little kit for her of things to take with her. An Alex Gray book, and some art supplies, and some, oranges. And I wrote my phone number really big and told her I would pray for her, and that she was able to come and talk to me. Because very often when our teens want to start exploring, and they have to lie about it, it ends up causing separation in the family, because you don't really know what they're doing or where it's at. And again, I want to be able to have conversations about, no, I don't really think, doing methamphetamines is the same as, psilocybin. So the music, communication, and not only are having art supplies handy, and it might be really natural art supplies so that you're not smelling Sharpies or chemical things. Beeswax crayons might be preferable, but also having really inspirational art books could be nice to look at. And then, indigo is about where you put your consciousness. I really like the idea that if you're going to watch a movie, if it's a movie that's going to be inspirational, if you're going to look at books, maybe even things that get you high anyways, like yoga and breath work and chanting or dancing might be things that you incorporate. And I'm glad that Arrowhead has come up because education is really key. You know, before you launch into this, you should find out what are some of the side effects? Is it normal to have elevated blood pressure or your pupils dilated? If people know that's going to happen, then it doesn't freak them out so much. And last is violet or gold or white, the crown chakra, the top of our head, our center of spiritual connection. One of the reasons that I am an advocate for psychedelic is because I believe that these things can open us up spiritually to realize that there's more than meets the material realm, that maybe we grow in our spiritual belief or our potential. I'm also an end-of-life doula, and so I do work with people who are either trying to come to terms with their own death or the death of a loved one. We just recently created a podcast called Waking Up Before We Die. But really, my intention is these potent medicines have the potential to wake us up, to live a better life, to create a better world. And that's why I am such an advocate for using these medicines in a safe way so that we can truly create a better world. And I thank you all so much for being part of this consciousness raising experience.
Thank you so much, Brigitte. Our next amazing speaker is Craig Salerno. Craig, am I pronouncing your last name correctly? Salerno? Okay. Craig Salerno is a Boulder-based licensed professional counselor and licensed addiction counselor, currently in private practice with a focus on treating addiction and supporting the mental health and transformation of his clients. Craig Salerno has a Master of Arts in Contemplative Psychotherapy from Naropa University. Craig previously served as Clinical Director of North Star Transitions, a substance abuse recovery facility. Craig focuses on supporting mental health and transformation by offering individual psychotherapy, couples work, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and psychedelic integration with clinical supervision and consultation. Craig runs a bi-monthly psychedelic integration circle and is passionate about helping individuals build safe and informed choices around psychedelic medicine and healing. Please welcome Craig Salerno.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you everyone else who created this event. This has been really wonderful. I've been participating all morning and just loved Ingrid Walker's talk. And thank you, Brigitte, for starting us off. That was really energizing. Yeah, the main thing I wanted to just share about is just kind of the discussion of using psychedelics as a therapeutic tool and just the importance of opening up access to that, providing the ability for clients to seek services that include psychedelics, and just how dire of a position we're in with the mental health crises, with the overdose crises, to just really bring in any medicine that helps people heal. So I'll just be speaking from that perspective as someone who offers ketamine-assisted psychotherapy to clients that are struggling, but also someone who's doing psychedelic integration for people that are choosing to pursue healing through the path of psychedelics, utilizing ayahuasca, utilizing ibogaine, utilizing microdosing psilocybin, and just giving people safe and supportive outlets to discuss set and setting, skill set, how to work with substances, how to navigate difficult experiences, how to navigate joyful experiences. And I just think it's very imperative that we give people proper environments and good spaces and community to discuss this work. So a little bit about my background. Worked in the substance abuse and addiction field for over a decade, where I watched countless clients pass away to overdose, to suicide. And it's just very clear that we need more avenues to heal. And psychedelics, from my perspective, have been one pathway that really help people move through trauma and just have become very potent tools in the therapeutic landscape. And there's currently a lot of blockades to utilizing psychedelics. I think most people know we have research studies coming out proving the efficacy, but it's a very slow rolling process. But what's becoming very clear is that when people struggle to use classic Western forms of treatment, medication, therapy, and they kind of hit this stuck point. Psychedelics are a really powerful tool to helping people transition through mental health crises, to help shed old identities, to move through trauma, and to just experience joy and the profundity of life. So I'm just speaking today as an advocate of allowing people to utilize psychedelics for healing, to get people trained in utilizing these substances and being able to sit with people as they navigate psychedelic experience. And then beyond that, to just create a richer environment where psychedelics can be openly talked about, including cannabis, as powerful healing tools. So I'm a huge advocate for decriminalization, for allowing medical use of psychedelics, and then also just therapeutic pursuit, even if it's for psychospiritual growth. I think all of them are very powerful. I've seen people do amazing healing work. I've seen people hit the point of debating whether or not they want to stay alive, utilizing psychedelics and finding deep richness in life. And we need to provide people pathways to do that. So very blessed to be on this panel. Thank you so much for the invitation. And yeah, I look forward to our panel today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Craig. I am pleased to introduce our next speaker. My introduction of him will be a bit longer because I'll be sharing his story. It's a very compelling story. Alan Floyd is joining us today to share his successful experiences as a therapeutic psychedelic patient. Alan is far more confident that he would have taken his life by now if it had not have been for psychedelic therapy. Alan's previous life was as a corporate executive with an MBA in international management. It was a career that he loved. He was diagnosed with complex PTSD, severe anxiety, and intractable depression caused by severe abuse by a Catholic priest and nun during the 1970s. In 1985, Alan was riding a bike and was hit by a car that was traveling 55 miles an hour, resulting in severe neck, spine, and hip injuries. For 10 years following, Alan had frequent and reoccurring shoulder dislocations, which led to a shoulder replacement surgery and continued bone spurs. After years of intense chronic pain, in 2006, Alan was diagnosed with advanced spinal tumors and spinal cysts. Alan's medical team advised him at that time that he immediately retire from his career and start long-term pain management. And he was given less than 2 years to live. Alan Floyd's pain management team included using high-dose opioids. He was prescribed 450 milligrams a day, combination of fentanyl, oxycodone, and what is this? Dilaudid? Thank you. Thank you. To treat the pain. He was prescribed Xanax to treat end-of-life anxiety. In 2007, the awareness of the opioid epidemic came to light, and Alan was ordered to reduce his opioid use from 450 milligrams to 120 milligrams in a short 3-month period. This period of time was an incredible low for Alan as he dealt with crippling withdrawal symptoms for the next 2 years. During these very dark days, Alan became suicidal, in part as a side effect from some of the 16 different antidepressants that he was prescribed. Alan became determined to eliminate all opioid medications and was begging for alternative options to deal with his complex PTSD, severe depression, and intense chronic spinal pain. It was jointly decided by Alan's doctors that he unequivocally qualified as a patient for the 2016 Federal Right to Try bill. This Right to Try bill gives patients with a terminal diagnosis the right to try psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, and or MDMA to treat end-of-life anxiety. Today, Alan's primary medications are LSD for pain management, complex PTSD, severe depression, psilocybin mushrooms for pain management, severe depression, and complex PTSD. Ketamine to control intense nerve pain and severe depression. And medical marijuana to control inflammation, pain, and anxiety. Alan rarely needs opioids, but he once or twice a year uses, help me out, Alan.
Dilaudid.
Dilaudid for intense pain flare-ups. And on rare occasions, he takes Xanax for night terrors related to end-of-life anxiety. The frequency and the intensity of these horrific night terrors have been effectively treated using the combination of alternative medications. It has taken Alan many, many years to reach a place of complete acceptance of what is and what will be. He is finally here. He never would have reached this point without psychedelics. Please welcome Alan Floyd.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be a part of this panel. It's been a long time coming, everything that I've been through. You did a great job explaining pretty much exactly where I am and what I have done to get here. As I noted, or as Susan noted, I was on a very, very large quantity of medications that just knocked me down. And anytime, unfortunately, anytime that I asked the doctors what was happening and why I felt the way I felt, it was either an increase in the medication or another medication on top of that to treat the bad symptoms from the prior medication. It took me a long time to realize, because I, like many people, thought the doctors had all of the answers. And it took me a really long time to realize that this was not necessarily the case. And thankfully, I had some incredible therapists who pretty much convinced me that I know my body better than anyone else. I know my brain better than anyone else. And I need to go with what I'm feeling. And pretty much at the point where I was required by the federal government to reduce from 450 milligrams a day to 120 milligrams a day over a 3-month period, I said, forget this. I'm coming off of all of these. They're really not doing me any good. They're killing me, actually. And I feel horrible all of the time. So at that point in time, I went to my pain management team and my psychiatrist, as well as all of my therapists. I see roughly 12 therapists. So I'm very ensconced in the medical field, and told them, what do I do? I am at a loss and I'm suicidal. I'm telling you I'm suicidal. I need help. What are we going to do about this? My psychiatrist, thank goodness, was the one who said, you completely qualify for this based upon this right to try bill. We're getting you on this. I don't know anything about this. We're simply trying to work with this. You're kind of on your own. You need to figure out how to procure your mushrooms and your LSD and whatever else you're going to be using. And you need to dose it yourself. I can't help you there. I don't know any information. Thus began roughly 3.5 years ago, a period where I had to figure out what was right for me. And I really didn't know much about guides and things of that nature. Now, as background, I will tell you that I, in the past, had used mushrooms and LSD very frequently. So this was not a situation where I was fearful going into a new type of drug. So I felt okay doing that. It did take me roughly 6 to 7 months to learn what my microdosing regimen is. And just, I get asked this quite frequently. What is your microdosing regimen? Essentially, I do 200 to 250 milligrams. That's 1/15 of a tripping dose every 4 days. So another question I get is how do you function on it? Do you do okay? Yes, I do fine. It's less than the feeling is less than a cup of coffee. Quite frankly, a cup of coffee is going to give me more feeling physiologically in my body than using a microdose of LSD or mushrooms. This has significantly changed my life, being on this for 3.5 years and understanding where I'm at now. My psychiatrist has told me that I no longer suffer from treatment-resistant depression. That diagnosis is gone. The night terrors that I used to have, I used to get roughly 3 a night, to be quite honest. They were very, very, very bad, where I could not go back to sleep. Sleeping with my wife, I would wake up literally hitting and swinging in the night and kicking and screaming and not knowing what was going on, thinking I was not breathing. So it was a bad situation. Nowadays, I call that complex PTSD is what I'm going to say. Nowadays, that scenario for me has completely gone away, to the point where if I do have an episode in the evening, it is more of a wake up and, oh, that was kind of a weird, not so nice dream, but I'm here, I'm okay, everything's good, I'm going back to sleep. That never, ever happened before. When the situation such as I just described came up in the past and I'd have a severe night terror, common process was get up and take some Xanax, like 2 or 3, a bunch to calm myself down and maybe be able to get to sleep with using 2 to 3 Xanax. So it was a horrible situation. As I said, it's taken me 3.5 years to get to this point. I'm no longer suicidal, and I believe fully that that is because of the psychedelic regimen that I am on. As Brigitte said earlier, psychedelics aren't for everyone. I don't want to come across that this is the panacea and the problem solving for all of humanity. It's simply not. There are people who cannot take psychedelics. You have to have excellent set and setting, as was said. So that's really where I'm coming from. And I hope this is helpful. And thank you again for being so kind to have me on this panel. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Alan, for sharing your story. We're very happy that you're with us. Our next speaker today is Art Way. Art is currently the owner of Equitable Consulting. He has also worked at the Chinook Fund, the People's Leadership Council, the Center for Progressive Leadership, the Sentencing Project. And he has, for 8 years, he was the Colorado State Director for the Drug Policy Alliance. And he ushered in a pivotal harm reduction legislation in Colorado, such as the Good Samaritan policy. He was a core campaign committee member for the 2012 Amendment 64 campaign to legalize and regulate adult use of cannabis in Colorado. And since then, Art has worked with a lot of regulatory agencies in Colorado, and he has implemented diversion and education opportunities for juveniles caught in the criminal justice system, and also has developed a grant program to fund 4 pilot projects that offer pre-arrest harm reduction type of services for people who are experiencing drug dependency and broader behavioral health issues and homelessness. Please welcome Art Way.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Good to be back. It's been a couple of years, but I've been a part of this 420 event for, I don't know, quite a while now. So it's been a few years, so I'm glad to be back. I'm going to touch on the exceptionalism piece again. I feel like I owe that to all my drug policy comrades across the country to once again speak on that, this whole distinction between soft and hard drugs. And I think that distinction is real. The last thing I want to do is try to gloss over how dangerous so-called hard drugs can be. And I don't want to gloss over the differences and the healing aspects that we get with cannabis as well as psilocybin and MDMA. But, I think Betty said it earlier, when you talk about drug policy, is it about the drugs or is it about the people? And I think in order for us to fully establish behavioral health, treatment, public health, harm reduction centered infrastructure, we really have to look to decriminalize all substances. The criminal justice system and the drug war and the age of mass incarceration, that was born on the backs of heroin users and cocaine users. It wasn't really born to the same degree on the backs of psilocybin users and marijuana users. So when we think about trying to undo what's been done over the last 40 or 50 years, when it comes to the demonization and the stigmatization of certain communities and how we've related certain communities to certain substances, and then went crazy when it comes to the criminal justice system and all the police issues that we're seeing, that was due to the stigmatization of certain substances and connecting certain communities with those substances. White people have done crack from the beginning of when somebody first rocked up powder cocaine. White people, of course, have used heroin, but over the years, these substances have been linked with the African-American community and led to disparities like, 8 out of 10 people in federal prison for crack cocaine are African-Americans, and just ridiculous type of disparities. So it's not to say that these substances aren't more dangerous, but it's to say that as you advocate for psilocybin, as you continue to advocate for cannabis, I think your default position should also be to advocate for all drug decriminalization in order to set up that public health infrastructure that Portugal is leading the way in doing right now. We cannot no longer rely on the criminal system and morality and judgment to deal with this very complex issue of problematic and chaotic drug use, drug dependency, addiction, whatever you may want to call it. It's a very complex issue, and I think we need to dive into the complexities of it and really establish a government infrastructure to deal with it. And one other thing I'd like to say that might be kind of pushing the paradigm a little bit. Not that all drug decrim is pushing the paradigm. I know everybody here is pretty much on the same team. But like I said, I felt like I owed that to the people that I've worked with for so long. This idea of trauma being the basis and the core of everything. And I think that is the case in many times with many people. But my issue with drugs really came out of boredom and cynicism. And I think there's a lot of people that started along that same type path. So we need to leave space for those who are struggling with dependency or problematic use, who really didn't have trauma in their background. But as Carl Hart says, if you find yourself in a situation where drugs are the primary tool for satisfaction and gratification in your life, you're probably dealing with some type of level of dependency. And I think anybody can find themselves in that position, whether or not they were victims of trauma or experienced certain things in their life. And so when you talk about diving into the complexities, I think we need to leave space for that aspect as well, that people get involved in drugs for a variety of reasons. But once they find themselves in a situation where the drug use is where their primary satisfaction and gratification comes from in life, they're essentially could be in trouble when it comes to dependency. So, happy to be here, happy to learn from all you wonderful folks, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Art. Our next panelist is Kent Hutchison. Kent Hutchison is a professor of psychiatry at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and an adjunct professor of psychology and neuroscience at CU Boulder. His research is funded by NIH, National Institute of Health, and is focused on identifying the potential risks and benefits of cannabis products that are widely available to consumers. So they have been comparing different forms of administration, such as concentrates, flowers, and edible, different rations of THC to CBD, and doing this across the demographic groups, young, aging consumers, different medical groups. So please welcome Kent Hutchison.
Thank you, Susan, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I really enjoyed listening to other panelists thus far. So I thought I'd just give you a little bit of background. I know it may sound a bit different, in terms of where I'm coming from, but part of, I think, what my job is to maybe attend to what's happening around me and think about ways to translate what people are telling me into proposals for research that NIH can get behind. That's kind of what we've been doing. And this goes back, my background traditionally was a substance abuse scientist, so focused mostly on alcohol and tobacco back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then interestingly enough, we decided to do a study at Boulder on cannabis in like 2006. And back then, of course, it was legal from a medical perspective. And we sort of perhaps somewhat naively took the same approach that we were taking with alcohol and tobacco, where we just wanted to do a simple study to look at the acute effects of cannabis, right? And so I'm sure some of you are aware of this, but back then what that meant was you had to basically go to the DEA, right, and get a Schedule I license. And then you had to go to the FDA and get an IND, so special approval to test a drug. And then you had to go to NIH and get approval. And then after you did all of that, right, you can imagine the mountain of paperwork, you basically were sent cannabis that was produced on the government farm in Mississippi, right? And so, we jumped into this and it was a lot of work just to get permission. And then, I remember the DEA showing up, two agents came to interview me, right, in my office in Munzinger Psychology Building on campus, which is very intimidating, right? And so after all of that, I got a phone call from the assistant in the front office saying, you have a FedEx box here. And I go and I pick it up. And sure enough, they FedExed me a bunch of marijuana cigarettes, right? So it's just, that was kind of an interesting way to get your research grade cannabis back in 2007. So here's the thing, right? We did all this, followed all the rules, did this study. We had people using cannabis, smoking cannabis in the lab. And I remember that, one of the first participants came back to us after using the lab and said, that was like the most disgusting thing I've ever had in my life, right? And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And, it turns out, of course, that the cannabis they gave us was 3% THC, right? And this is 2007. So we're talking, medical, definitely high teens, even, at that point, right? And it turns out too, I found this out years later, which is why we don't do this anymore. They, the way they do it, the DEA only lets the government, the NIH, grow cannabis when they exhaust their original supply, right? So if they grow a little bit too much, this cannabis sits around in steel drums for a couple of years, right? Until people use it up, yeah. And then they can grow more, right? So it's kind of hard to, you don't realize it. And I can go into more detail, but it's probably too much. So here's the thing. We were like, this is ridiculous. We've learned absolutely nothing, right? Absolutely nothing, all that work. But then in 2012, 2013, everything changed again, right? And we're like, okay, wait a second, right? We need to get back into this. We actually need to look at both the benefits, right? And the potential risks. And we need to use products that people are actually using. So my first thought was, okay, we can easily do this. It's legal now. We just go buy it, just like we do an alcohol study, right? We can go buy it, bring it to the lab. And then I got partway through the approval process at CU Boulder and realized, nope, that's not going to happen, right? So they sort of squashed it. But then the legal team at Boulder really worked with us to make it happen. We wrote a big grant at the same time to NIH to say, hey, this is really important that we understand the products that people are actually using, and we understand what does THC do, what does CBD do, right? How does the combination work together? And so right around the time we got a big grant, we also got approval from CU to do the research, which was not completely coincidental, right? So yeah, CU, I have to say, came through for us in terms of sort of being on the cutting edge and enabling us to do this research. Since then, we've been, in my colleagues, and Bidwell and Angela Bryan, we've sort of spread out in other ways. So we're looking at, for example, THC and CBD in the context of anxiety. We're looking at in the context of aging and pain. And, you know, one of the big ones that's been touched on by panelists today is opiate use. And so whenever I would go and give a talk, you know, people would come up to me afterwards and say, hey, look, you know, you should really thinking about opioid use and what is, you know, what can THC and CBD do to help people? And of course, it's a huge crisis, and that made a lot of sense to us. And so we're launching a new study any day now, looking at how THC and CBD might be useful in terms of people cutting back on opioids. So I'm going to leave it off there, and maybe I'll have a chance to talk some more about this stuff in a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Kent. And a round of applause for all our panelists and all the work that they are doing. We'll start questions. I will ask all our panelists a few of the questions that I have been thinking about. We'll start with Alan. Alan, as a therapeutic psychedelic patient, can you function normally on a day-to-day basis?
To be quite honest, I function far, far better now in the past 3+ years than I functioned using all of the opioids 3+ years prior. As I said, the dosage that I take is honestly so small that none of my vision changes. I don't see things, I don't hear things, I don't get those classic hallucination type episodes on a microdose. You just don't feel it like that. So I can go on my day-by-day activities far more pleasantly and in a better mood now that I am regularly microdosing than I could prior to microdosing, to answer your question.
Mm-hmm. How do therapeutic psychedelics work within your pain management program for both mental and physical health?
Excellent question. When I informed pain management in particular that I was going down the road of psychedelics, of course they looked at me like, oh wow, that's out of our realm. You know, I hope another doctor is working with you. And when I informed them that I was doing this with my psychiatrist, it was a big sigh of relief on their part, so to speak. Oh, thank God that we don't have to deal with this. You go and do what you got to do and let's see how it works. Well, 3+ years have gone by and pain management is telling me I'm better than they've ever seen me before, as far as my mood, as far as my adaptability toward the pain, and I feel the same way. I use my wife and my 2 children. I have 2 grown children that my daughter just graduated college 2 weeks ago. So basically I use them and ask them, am I doing better, the same, or worse than I was before? By far, everyone in my family tells me I am doing far, far better. And I jokingly say, you know, if something were to happen where if the police were to come by or whatever and give me problems about the psychedelics that I use, my wife would say, don't you dare take these away from him because you will have to deal with him. I'm bringing him to you to deal with if you take these away, because he's going to go off the rails.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's say one more question.
Sure.
You know, you said that playing a musical instrument is an essential part of your daily life. And so what benefits do you experience from the practice, musical practice, and how does making music like complement the benefits that you experience from psychedelics?
Sure. I'll try to answer that, but please keep in mind that I'm a layman. I'm not a doctor on this, so I really don't know all of the right terms and the functionality of how it works. But what I have read and the way that I understand it is we're moving into a segment that I call brain plasticity, and that's apparently what many doctors call it, whereby the psychedelics definitely work on your brain plasticity, or the ability to adapt by new experiences and to change your thought patterns, for example, about the pain. Well, it turns out that using a musical instrument and playing a musical instrument, even 30 minutes a day, that's usually all that I practice, maybe 30 minutes a day. By playing a musical instrument and really connecting your brain with your body and your finger movements and things of that nature, that really helps the brain plasticity. And for me, it helps deal with the chronic pain. One point I want to get across is the psychedelics do not in any way decrease my pain. What they do, as well as playing the instruments, is make me more adaptable and look at the pain in a different manner, as opposed to looking at the pain as, oh my God, I can't believe I'm suffering from this. I just need to put my head under a pillow. It's all done. So that combination of, for me, the psychedelics, the playing an instrument, and many other tools in the tool chest. I don't want people to come off thinking that I've found the magic formula in one thing, because that would be a very, very false statement. It takes many different tools in the tool chest, and everyone is different. So my dosing, for example, is going to be different from someone else's dosing. You and your doctor have to figure out what works for you, I guess, is my answer. So I hope I answered that in a decent way.
Yes, you did, Alan. Thank
Okay.
you. Ken Hutchison, I would like to know, well, me and Major Tom, the cat, what inspired you to start your program in cannabis research?
Yeah, so I sort of gave you some of the background history there, but I guess on a personal level, what happened was that right after Colorado legalized, my mom called me up and said, hey, I need some help, right? My mom had a chronic immune system condition her whole life, right? So she went through all different versions of medications and until each one basically failed her in some way. And then toward the end, there wasn't really much left that she could do. And she, this is a person who the strongest thing she ever took was, iced tea, right? So not even coffee, no alcohol, no anything. She came from a conservative state, and she said, I really, I want to drive there and I need to try something. And so she did. And I remember, taking her around to dispensaries, and then there's this, little old lady engaging with the the bud tenders, and it was fascinating to watch. And I didn't really have, there still isn't a lot of research, right, exactly what works and how it works. So she had to experiment for herself to figure out what worked, and so that was, I think, both motivational, right, because obviously you want to help your family, but also eye-opening, because on a personal level, people didn't really know where to start, right? You can start with what you learn from the bud tender, but we should do better. And remember, my job is research, so as a scientist, I thought we really need to learn more about how to help these people like my mom, right? Also, my wife, a couple years later, had breast cancer. Same thing. Like, they want to know how can I deal with peripheral induced or chemotherapy induced peripheral neuropathy? How can I don't want to take opiates because I hate the side effects, right? And this, the surgeons would just shrug their shoulders and say, we don't know what to tell you. And we should do better in terms of scientists, in terms of basically educating people about these issues. That was my motivation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What has surprised you the most from the studies? Like, what have you discovered?
It's I think coming from that tradition of substance abuse and maybe looking at things a certain way from decades ago. We were doing some early work looking at concentrates, right? And our basically the way we got around the legal part was we have a van that we drive around. It's like a mobile laboratory, so we can't bring cannabis products on campus, but we can bring our lab to people, right? And that's what we do. In this study, we were looking at concentrates, and these people were regular concentrate users, and they would use their concentrate, and they would get in the van, we would test them, And, we were seeing blood levels, 10 times, more, maybe more, 10, 20 times what we'd normally see. But these people were completely functional. Then they would get out of the van and they would go to work, or they would go rock climbing, or they would do whatever. And I think, that was kind of an eye-opening thing in terms of sort of rethinking about what exactly does it mean when some people take more or less. And in fact, it could be tolerance, it could be individual differences, or something that allow these people to be very functional, right? And despite taking a dose that we might have thought of ahead of time would be, too much.
Great, thank you. I need to ask Craig some questions. Craig, I'm sorry, I'm going to Art. So Art, with you were talking about like the cannabis and psilocybin exceptionalism. And so will that cannabis and psychedelic exceptionalism deter efforts to decriminalize all drugs?
Only if the activists that are pursuing reform in the psychedelic and cannabis space decide that in order to increase their chances, that they need to throw other drugs under the bus. I think we saw that with marijuana legalization. I remember during the implementation phase, I was working on defeating a bill that looked to essentially get Child Protective Services involved whenever a mother would admit to cannabis use. And so, a lot of people within the cannabis space came out against that as well. But the way that they decided to come out against that was to talk about the differences between a cannabis user and a heroin user or a cocaine user. And, it's just not beneficial for the whole movement. So, I think it's fine for advocates within the cannabis and, psilocybin and the psychedelic space to speak about the wonders of these substances when it comes to helping to deal with, symptoms of some of the most problematic diseases that we face as a society. But you can do that without throwing, other substances under the bus. And so the main concern is we need to keep momentum moving in the all drug decrim direction. And there's no need to step on one or step on others in order to elevate, what you're working on. So, I think when it comes to activism, you just have to be real careful with that. We see that now when it comes to criminal justice reform, and there's this like separation between violent crime and nonviolent crime. But in reality, a lot of the crimes that we call violent, no violence was ever perpetrated, but the crime itself is considered violent to a certain extent, right? So you just have to be careful of playing this game of drowning one thing in order to lift something else up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one more question for you. You mentioned parenting, and as we're sort of shifting that paradigm of a user is not an abuser, and you're working with regulatory agencies like Department of Human Services, Department of Regulatory Affairs, and then you have your working on many of the work groups for either the Marijuana Enforcement Division or the local Denver excise and licensing rulemaking groups. What, in terms of the parenting and the paradigm shift, what is that like in working with these government agencies in shifting that paradigm about parents also being drug users?
Well, from what I remember, with those groups that you mentioned, that's an all cannabis discussion, right? So the issue around parenting and the discrimination that takes place within Child Protective Services, and how the discrimination between Child Protective Services is similar to the discrimination we see within the criminal system as a whole. Those type of things don't come up. usually in those type of environments. But what I do remember when I was in the middle of that fight was you really had to define what a dangerous situation was for a child. And you really had to fight against the discrimination. You know, if you got a young, a young white lady full of tattoos, she's a punk rocker, you know what I'm saying? She's pregnant and she admits to drug use. The response to her is a lot different than the response to the soccer mom who lives in one of those $2 million Boulder homes who admits to drug use, right? So it was really just highlighting how discrimination plays a role when it comes to child protective services, and figuring out really what is truly harmful for either a child who has not been born yet, or for a child in a certain situation that's already 3 or 4 or 5, 6 years old. So there was just a lot of lazy policy that said, okay, if drugs were involved in any bit, that equates to harm. And so we really had to roll back and say, you know what, there's a lot more parents out here who are dealing with alcoholism, who are dealing with prescription drug issues, that were providing an unsafe environment much more than some of these parents who were using cocaine Thursday through Sunday. So it's always trying to peel back the stigma that we've created over the last 50 years when it comes to illicit substances, and try to really figure out where is the harm, where is it coming from, and how are you being discriminatory in your approach.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Art. Craig, questions for you. You've said, on your website that a major aspect of your therapeutic outlook is to strive to combine the evidence-based practices of Western psychotherapy with the wisdom and compassion of Eastern psychology. So what is a success and a challenge that you have faced with this integration?
Thank you. I'm just so appreciating this panel, by the way. It's just such an eclectic little group. Yeah, and it reminds me, I saw this question in the side and it kind of matches with this. Do you find the addition of skill to the set and setting helpful? And I think that's actually where I draw a lot from the Eastern psychological point of view, which is like the ability to work with your mind is such a power and a privilege when navigating psychedelic experience and mental health in general. And the ability to cultivate openness and curiosity and compassion, and to have practices that help you engage these forms of mind. And those can just be really potent additions to A, just examining your mental health without substances, but B, utilizing psychedelics and being in an altered state. The ability to be open, curious, and compassionate, and to mind your somatic experience is such a gift. So I think that's really huge. And I'd say the challenge is just teaching and guiding people. I think a lot of people want to come in and do psychedelic assisted therapy and kind of do these macro dose kind of big launches. And I think a lot of people are really desperate and in really painful spaces. So the invitation to do prep work and to learn basic mindfulness practice first, and to engage in a therapeutic relationship before we ingest the substance. A lot of people have a hesitation and just kind of want to go and kind of work from that compulsive desire to escape pain, which makes a lot of sense. So I'd say, yeah, the challenge is getting people to really get on board with prepping and learning and practicing skills first, and then navigating once you're kind of oriented. So I'd say that's, yeah, the hardest part about combining these two lenses.
Mm-hmm. Great. So in terms of shifting paradigms, medical marijuana has emerged largely outside the medical establishment. And so as the awareness and interest in therapeutic psychedelics emerge, how does this growth occur in a safe way for patients or interested participants?
I think that's the $1 million question. And I feel like there's so many different avenues in which it's being done right now. So I think you have the MAPS crew that's really working with this research orientation. You have indigenous communities that have been healing people with psychedelics for eons and have traditional ways of doing that are very set and, are like very much in the culture. And I think bringing all different traditions and ways on board is my view of how we do this. And I think we have a very eclectic group of people looking to do psychedelic medicine. Some people want to do it in a very medicalized model and want to come work with a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist in a team and work in that. It feels very safe and containing. Other people want to do it in more of a traditional indigenous perspective with ceremony attached. And I feel like we just need avenues and openness with each road. And we need people who are willing to explore different avenues and people who are willing to teach and guide in different avenues. So my preferred perspective is an eclectic one where we just kind of open all the doors. And I think that's why Decrim is such a potent and powerful way to do this, is we open all roads and we introduce high integrity professionals and teachers and guides and individuals that want to step into this world and get people trained and excited about this work. And then people have a buffet in which to choose from. So that's my preferred way.
A buffet, that's great. Brigitte, I have a few questions for you. So your career is practicing and educating about herbal and natural wellness, which has existed long before Western medicine. So what do you see are important facets to consider as Western medicine begins to study and understand the applications of therapeutic psychedelics?
Well, the first thing I think of is that, you know, the psychedelic experience can actually be an opportunity to go really deep into your body and ask, what is this illness trying to tell me? And even be open that you may get some answers. I've known a number of people who've done medicine ceremonies, whether it be in the Amazon, maybe they were diagnosed with something and come back like, I need to stop eating sugar and take more vitamin C. So I love the idea. But it also seems that the psychedelic experience can also be an opportunity to really read like where your body is at. And if you get messages like, I really should be doing more yoga, or I need to get outdoors more, this is really an opportunity to learn something and then bring it into your daily life. Because rather than only, you know, trying to prevent a disease, I'm really in favor of activating people to be building health every day with all the choices that we make.
Mhm.
And I know, I think the first time when I was really quite young, the first time I ever, or early time I took LSD, I was in a natural food store and I was like, whoa, like sprouts. I want to start growing sprouts. And wow, this food is alive. And so that was a real wake up to me that I needed to, you know, really change the way I eat so that when I do psychedelics, I'm going to feel even more amazing.
Can you compare and contrast the social use and therapeutic use of psychedelics? Like, how do we shift the common cultural association of, you know, acid trip, drug trip, to a compassionate understanding of therapeutic psychedelics?
Well, you know, because I am an elder and a grandmother, you know, I know a lot of my friends are much younger, and the idea is like, well, let's just take something at a festival or a concert and see what happens. But I really try to encourage people that that can be a totally different experience. And even though dancing and listening to music can be wonderful, you're not going to have the in-depth personal experience where you get those aha moments about what is appropriate for you. Your experience is really going to be guided by the music and the light show and all that. And even though that might be fun, I am not one to consider, you know, at least for me, it's not about a party. It's that these are serious substances and that what you expose yourself to could really be very, very magnified. Dr. Leary used to talk about imprinting. And sometimes you go to a concert and like, you know, the message that's coming in can be, you know, a bit nefarious or ego driven. And is that really what you want permeating your consciousness? So I'm very protective, and I think let's create a really safe container for this so that you have what you need, and that maybe these aren't things you need to do all the time, because you get something so profound that carries you for many moons afterwards. And it may be something that you even just do, you know, a few times or once in your life, that can be very life changing.
Great. One more question for you, Brigitte. So I was reading in your Naropa University bio, and you mentioned that you were going to write a racy 60s memoir. How's that book coming along?
It's coming along. I'm reading, it's actually being called Wildflower Child, A Tale of Sex, Psychedelics, and Natural Foods. And I'm reading it out loud to a couple friends every Monday night. And, people say if you can remember the 60s, you weren't really there. But for me, that was not the case because at a very young age, I started getting really interested in health practices, yoga, natural foods, herbal medicine. And I also became a mother at a very young age. And so my priority was my children. And so I never really went off into doing too much of anything. It's like, no, I need to nourish my children. I need to be responsible. My kids are going to wake up early in the morning. I need to be there. So I'm really excited about this book. And I think it's also an opportunity to have a voice of the feminine. And there's a lot of herbal wisdom. I lived in a teepee for 2.5 years, the time of living with Rosemary Leary when she was, wanted for helping Dr. Leary escape from prison. There's a lot of adventures I'm including in there, certainly a lot of name dropping. But my sister said, tell us about the 60s. So this is my opportunity to share. But again, it's not sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I'm very specific. It's enough sex to make it really spicy. Psychedelics and natural foods was more my thing than just, dead shows, even though I did go to a few of those.
Great. Thank you so much. We have a few minutes left for some audience questions, and I apologize to the audience. It's always the challenge with great panels and panelists to squeeze in as much information and questions as possible. This was one directed to Craig. Let's see, what do you think of microdosing in the tech world? The perception is that it could be unfair, like athletes using performance enhancing drugs.
Yeah, I was actually going to try to answer that one. So I have no inherent issue with people using psychedelics as a quote unquote performance enhancer. I think a lot of people do it for optimization. So using psychedelics as a way to be more creative, more open, to experience more intimacy and relationship. And I think those are all beautiful ways to use medicine. I'd say the edge for me is when psychedelics are used to promote and engage the system of capitalism and support systems that are already really painful. So that'd be my edge around that, but it makes a lot of sense to me that people utilize it for performance enhancement, and I don't have any inherent issue with that mode of use.
Great. Question for Brigitte says, thank you. Let's see. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. What advice would you give for integrating the lessons learned in the psychedelic realm? Oftentimes the lessons are so fleeting. So how can we hold on to those lessons?
Well, certainly one of the big issues is integration. So I try to encourage people to have a day off after a big experience, to find someone they can talk to about it. And maybe plan this out beforehand. Is there a partner or a roommate or the guide that you've been working with? Writing about it. Being really open to looking at dreams, images that come up in meditation, because I do think that the experience continues to unfold for a lot longer than the actual experience. And we don't want it to be fleeting. I always encourage clients to come with a journal, not that they're spending a lot of time writing, but towards the end of the experience, you may get things like, I need to reach out to this person. I need to call that person. And it might not be something you do then, but it's a way of creating evolution. Like, I learned something, I'm going to act on it in the next few weeks. And I love the idea that, this is an opportunity for consciousness evolution. And that's why I'm so interested in this subject. Thank you all so much.
Yes, this has been such a rewarding opportunity. I'm really so excited that Carolyn and Sarah have organized the symposium. We're we're Zooming, some of us may be Zooming on shrooms, but this has been a really, really wonderful opportunity. And if all the panelists would like to put into the chat how they would like to be contacted. So any of the audience members can reach out to ask their questions that weren't addressed today during the session. That would be great.
Wonderful, Susan. Thank you so much. You did an incredible job as moderator, and thank you to all the participants. And I also wanted to just, if any of you know an answer to this question that somebody posted that said, I would love to share my experiences using different pharmaceuticals, psychedelics, etc. Are there any researchers anywhere collecting such experiences? So I don't know about that specifically, but that's a good question. I'm also just posting in the chat here the next events coming up, so you can stay tuned. Thanks to all of you, Brigitte, Craig, Art, Kent, Alan, and Susan, for another excellent panel, raising the bar for this kind of public dialogue around these issues. Fearless. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Art.
thank you.
Yeah, we go way back. You spoke with my first class in 2014, and you've been involved in the symposium several times. I always appreciate your
Absolutely. Talk soon.
contribution. Yeah. Yeah, and thank you, Kent, for sharing your research. I hope there's talk of starting a cannabis certificate. So I don't know, is that moving forward at all, Kent? Do you know?
You know, I haven't heard the latest, but I think it will move forward. It might just take a little bit of time, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And that's something to look forward to, and also trying to shift paradigms and change systems is, you know, providing people an opportunity to actually get formal training in cannabis, a multidisciplinary approach at CU, you know. Susan, how did your talk at the History Center go?
It went really well. It was so exciting to have this opportunity to talk about, you know, my participation and role in the ballot initiatives in Colorado, from the 2000 medical marijuana initiative through the safer initiatives, 2005, 6, and 7, Denver, then Colorado, and then back to Denver. And then of course the big one, the Amendment 64, you know, ballot initiative. That was, it was really fun to go down history, you know, stroll down memory lane, and then bring up some of those little stories that you can't make up, but are just crazy part of shifting the law and changing.
Right.
Yeah, it was great fun. And I believe the History Colorado Center will have that talk on their website. So
Great. And then your archive, will that become an exhibit, or will that be something for researchers?
it's available for researchers, and they have digitized things, and so it's available online. And then also, I'm sure at some point they will have an exhibit, but it was
Okay.
more important that it's available for research purposes and
Great.
available to the public. Yeah, much
Great.
more
Yeah.
useful than being in boxes in my place.
Okay, you get cleared out some space in your storage room, I'm sure.
Yes, yes. Thank you to Marie Kondo.
Yeah, totally. That's so
Thank you
funny.
so much. I appreciate being a part of this.
Oh, Susan, you're
Thank you,
awesome.
Susan.
You're
Yeah.
an amazing facilitator as well. Thanks.